soldier set up a hidden camera to find out what his canine German Shepherd puppy did at night. What he saw left him in tears. Sergeant Daniel Brooks had seen his share of battles overseas, but nothing prepared him for the silent struggle happening right in his own home. After returning from deployment, he noticed his young canine German Shepherd puppy, Max, behaving strangely at night, disappearing for hours, returning with a look in his eyes that Daniel couldn't quite explain. Driven by curiosity and concern, he installed a hidden camera to uncover the mystery. But what that camera captured wasn't just surprising, it was enough to bring this battle-hardened soldier to tears. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this directly to you. Stay with us until the very end. What Sergeant Brooks discovered will completely change how you see loyalty and the silent battles even the bravest hearts fight when no one is watching. The house had never felt quite like home since Sergeant Daniel Brooks returned from his final deployment. His body was back, but his mind often wandered to the heat and chaos of the desert, to the brothers he left behind, and the scars that went far deeper than the ones on his skin. Yet, amid all the darkness, there was one bright spot. Max, the canine German Shepherd puppy he'd brought home just weeks before. Max was more than a pet. He was a promise of better days, a living symbol that life could be rebuilt, piece by piece. But lately, something wasn't right. Every night after Daniel went to bed, Max would vanish. The sound of his small paws would disappear down the hall, and for hours he wouldn't return. When he did, his soft whimpers echoed faintly before he curled up quietly at the foot of the bed. At first, Daniel thought it was just a phase, typical puppy curiosity. But over the following nights, the same pattern repeated, and every morning he would find Max staring out the living room window as if waiting for something or someone. Haunted by the thought that his little companion might be in distress, Daniel decided to find out what was really happening. His military instincts kicked in. If there was one thing he'd learned from years of reconnaissance, it was how to uncover hidden truths. So, that night, while Max dozed innocently in the corner, Daniel set up a small hidden camera in the living room, positioned perfectly to capture whatever the pup was up to after dark. He kissed Max gently on the head, whispered, "We'll figure this out, buddy," and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open, his heart pounding harder than it had during his most dangerous missions. He clicked play on the footage. At first, there was nothing unusual. Max paced the living room, tail low, ears alert. Then, as the clock struck midnight, Max stood perfectly still in front of the large living room window, his eyes locked onto something unseen through the glass. Moments later, Max did something that sent a wave of raw emotion crashing over Daniel. The little pup stood up on his hind legs, rested his front paws against the window, and began to howl. A long, low, heart-wrenching sound filled with longing and sorrow. Then, Max carefully pulled down the folded American flag Daniel had tucked onto a nearby shelf, the very flag that had been handed to him after his best friend, Sergeant Mike Reynolds, was laid to rest. Max gently dragged the war flag to the center of the room, laid down beside it, and curled up, his small body pressed against the only thing that still carried the scent of a fallen soldier. Tears blurred Daniel's vision as he watched. Somehow, Max had connected that flag with the man Daniel had loved like a brother, the man whose loss Daniel had never fully faced. For the rest of the night, the camera recorded Max lying silently next to the flag, occasionally looking toward the window as if expecting Sergeant Reynolds to walk through the door. When the footage ended, Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked down at Max, who sat quietly by his side, eyes full of innocent loyalty. "Were you grieving too, boy?" Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. At that moment, Daniel understood. He wasn't the only one carrying invisible scars. Max had been mourning in his own way, sensing his owner's silent pain and expressing it the only way he knew how. For the first time since returning home, Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, and as he reached down to pull Max into his arms, he made a silent promise. They would heal together. That morning, with the sun just beginning to cast warm light across the living room floor, Daniel sat in silence. Max curled tightly against his side. The night's revelation still echoed in his mind. This tiny, brave pup had been fighting his own quiet battle, mourning alongside a man who had been too locked in his own pain to notice. Daniel had always believed he was the protector, the soldier standing strong against any storm. But as he ran his hand through Max's thick fur, he realized something humbling. Sometimes, the strongest hearts walk on four legs and speak in silent gestures. Later that day, Daniel placed the carefully folded flag back on the shelf, but this time, he set it inside a clear case and positioned it proudly where both he and Max could see it. It was no longer a symbol of loss, but a reminder of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between those who serve and those who remain behind. Determined to break free from the haunting weight of his past, Daniel decided it was time to do something different. And for the first time in months, he left the house with a sense of purpose that didn't feel forced. He clipped Max's leash on and headed out into the crisp morning air, their feet moving in perfect rhythm down the quiet suburban streets. Max's tail wagged gently, his ears perked at every sound, alert but relaxed, a noticeable change from the restless pacing of nights before. As they passed the small-town park, Daniel noticed a group gathered near the old community center. A banner hung between two trees read, "Veterans Healing Through Service Dogs Program." Curious, he slowed his pace. Max, sensing his hesitation, sat calmly at his feet, looking up at him with those wise, knowing eyes. A woman approached with a warm smile. She wore a simple jacket embroidered with the program's logo and had the calm, steady demeanor of someone who had weathered many storms herself. "Beautiful shepherd," she said gently, kneeling to stroke Max's head. "What's his name?" "Max," Daniel replied, his voice cautious but open. "And you're his person?" she asked, looking up at Daniel. With kind eyes, Daniel gave a faint smile. "I guess you could say that. Though after last night, I'm starting to think he's more mine than I am his." She chuckled softly. "That's often the way it goes. I'm Karen. I run this program for vets and their dogs. You're welcome to join us. No pressure. Just people finding their way back with a little help from their four-legged partners." Daniel hesitated. For years, he'd trained others to face their fears, yet here he was, standing on the edge of something as terrifying as it was necessary: connection. Max gave a soft whine and nudged Daniel's leg with his nose. With a deep breath, Daniel nodded. Maybe it's time we both figured things out." The meeting was simple but powerful. Veterans shared stories of loss, hope, and the small victories that came with every wag of a tail and every loyal gaze. Daniel listened quietly, Max resting his head in his lap the entire time, his body warm and grounding against Daniel's leg. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, his voice was rough at first. "I thought bringing Max home would help me forget," he admitted. "But I realize now, he's not here to help me forget. He's here to remind me how to live." The group nodded knowingly. Karen placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're already on the right path, Daniel," she said softly. "And you're not walking it alone." That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel slept peacefully. And when he woke before dawn, he found Max curled not at the foot of the bed, but right beside him, his steady breathing a quiet reassurance that neither of them had to face their battles alone again. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Max became a familiar sight at the community center. Each morning, while most of the town was still asleep, They walked through the dew-covered grass of the park, pausing by the old oak tree where Daniel often sat in quiet reflection. With each passing day, something inside Daniel began to shift. The nightmares that once jolted him awake started to fade, replaced by memories of morning walks and Max's comforting presence. But recovery was never a straight path, and just as Daniel began to believe they had turned a corner, a new challenge presented itself. One chilly afternoon, Karen approached Daniel after a group session. Her tone was gentle, but her words held weight. "Daniel, I think Max is ready for something more structured. And I think you are too," she said, handing him a flyer. Daniel took it reluctantly and read the heading aloud. Advanced Canine Companion Training, Trust and Control Exercises. Karen smiled. "It's not about making him into a service dog. It's about deepening the bond. Trust under pressure. For both of you." Daniel wasn't sure he was ready. Trusting anyone, human or otherwise, had never been easy for him, not since the battlefield took away the friends he thought would stand beside him forever. But when he looked down at Max, who sat patiently by his side, tail gently thumping against the ground, he knew he couldn't keep holding back. So, the next morning, they showed up at the training field. The air was crisp, and tension hung thick as other veterans lined up with their dogs. Some dogs barked anxiously, others paced nervously. Max, sensing Daniel's apprehension, stood tall and alert, his eyes constantly checking back with his handler. The first exercise seemed simple enough, walking through a maze of distractions, food bowls, noise, and even loud noises designed to test focus. As the instructor gave the signal, Daniel took a deep breath and commanded, "Max, heel." Max responded immediately, his pace matching Daniel's perfectly. But as they approached a set of loud metal drums that clattered suddenly, Max froze. His ears pinned back, his body lowered into a defensive stance, and his eyes darted anxiously. Daniel knelt beside him, his heart pounding. He could almost feel the same panic rising in himself, the way it had during ambushes in hostile territory. The noise, the unpredictability, it was too familiar. "It's okay, Max," Daniel whispered, placing his hand gently on the dog's neck. "We're safe. I'm right here." Max whimpered softly, but didn't retreat. Slowly, Daniel stood again and took one careful step forward. Max followed, then another, and another, until they passed through the loudest part of the course. By the end of the exercise, Daniel's hands were trembling, but his heart swelled with pride. The instructor approached them with a knowing smile. "That's real courage, Sergeant," he said. "Not because it was easy, but because you both faced the fear and walked through it together." Daniel felt something break loose inside him, years of buried grief, guilt, and fear releasing all at once. For the first time, he understood that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to keep moving despite it. Later that night, as the house grew quiet, Daniel reviewed the day's events. He sat on the living room floor with Max sprawled beside him, his head resting on Daniel's lap. "You did good today, buddy," Daniel murmured, his fingers tracing slow patterns through Max's fur. "You showed me what it really means to be brave." Max lifted his head and licked Daniel's hand gently before settling back down with a contented sigh. And as Daniel stared at the folded flag resting proudly in its case, he knew that his journey wasn't just about overcoming his past. It was about building a future, one where loyalty, love, and trust could finally take the place of loss. The sun had barely risen when Daniel woke to the sound of heavy rain pelting against the windows. Max wasn't at the foot of the bed like usual. Panic gripped Daniel for a brief moment before he heard the soft, rhythmic thump of Max's tail against the living room floor. He found Max sitting by the window, his eyes fixed on the storm outside, ears twitching with every rumble of thunder. Max had always been calm during storms, but this time something felt different. His posture was tense, his breathing shallow. "Max?" Daniel called softly, approaching slowly. Max turned his head, but didn't move. His eyes were distant, almost as if he were somewhere else entirely. Then came a sudden, loud crack of thunder. Max jumped to his feet, let out a low, distressed whine, and bolted toward the back door. "Hey, it's okay," Daniel called. But Max was already pawing at the door, desperate to get out. It hit Daniel like a flash. This wasn't about the storm. Max wasn't reacting to the weather. He was reacting to a memory. Just like Daniel had his own triggers, Max had his. And then, before Daniel could stop him, Max managed to nudge the old latch loose and sprinted into the storm. "Max! Max!" Daniel yelled, grabbing his jacket and running out barefoot into the downpour. The rain was coming down hard, soaking Daniel to the bone within seconds. He sprinted down the muddy trail behind his house, his boots slipping, his heart pounding harder than during his most dangerous deployments. But this time, he wasn't dodging bullets. He was chasing the one soul that had pulled him out of his darkest moments. "Max." His voice cracked against the wind. There was no response. Daniel's mind spiraled into panic. Every worst-case scenario played out in his head. Max lost in the woods, injured, or worse. He forced himself to breathe, to think clearly. What would Max do? Where would he go? Then it hit him. The old community center. That was where Max had felt safe, where their bond had grown strongest. Daniel turned and headed straight for it, his legs burning as he pushed through the storm. As he neared the center, his heart nearly stopped. Through the sheets of rain, he saw a small, familiar shape huddled near the base of the flagpole. The American flag above, whipping wildly in the storm. Max sat there trembling. His eyes locked on the fluttering symbol above him. Daniel slowed, tears blending with the rain on his face. He approached slowly, dropping to his knees beside his faithful friend. "Max." His voice broke. "You're safe. You're not alone anymore. We're both safe now." Max turned his head toward Daniel, his body still shaking, but his eyes beginning to clear. Slowly he pressed his head against Daniel's chest, his entire frame trembling under the weight of old fears. Daniel wrapped his arms around Max, pulling him close despite the rain, the mud, the cold. None of it mattered. All that mattered was that they had found each other again. Two souls lost in their own storms, reunited in the middle of it all. It took a long time before either of them moved. But eventually, the rain began to ease, and the first pale light of dawn broke through the clouds. Daniel stood, lifting Maxie into his arms despite the dog's size. Step by heavy step, he carried his loyal friend home. That night, as the fire crackled warmly in the living room and Max lay curled up at his feet, Daniel realized something important. Healing wasn't a straight path. There would be storms, there would be setbacks, but as long as they faced them together, neither of them had to walk through the darkness alone ever again. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt a fragile, beautiful thing he hadn't known in years: hope. Weeks passed since the stormy night that nearly tore them apart, but something had shifted between Daniel and Max. Their bond had grown stronger, almost as if the storm had washed away not just the mud and rain, but the final walls Daniel had built around his heart. Max had become more confident too. His eyes held a spark of joy that hadn't been there before. His tail wagged more freely, and his loyalty was on full display wherever Daniel went. Yet just as things began to feel steady, life threw them an unexpected test. One crisp Saturday morning, Karen called Daniel with a surprising invitation. "We're holding a public demonstration for the Veterans Healing Through Service Dogs program," she explained. "It's meant to show how far the dogs and their partners have come. There'll be a large crowd, cameras, noise. It's a big step. I think you and Max should join." Daniel swallowed hard. The thought of standing in front of a crowd again made his chest tighten. He hadn't spoken in front of anyone since his last debriefing years ago. And Max, while braver now, still had moments where his old fears surfaced. "I don't know if we're ready," Daniel admitted. Karen's voice was calm but firm. "You don't have to be perfect, Daniel. You just have to show up." Those words stuck with him the rest of the day. That night, as Max lay asleep by the fireplace, Daniel sat quietly beside him. He thought back to everything they had overcome: the hidden camera revelation, the storm, the nights filled with silent grief. They hadn't come this far to hide from life. With a steadying breath, Daniel made his decision. "We'll do it, buddy," he whispered, gently stroking Max's fur. "Together." The day of the event arrived with clear skies and a sharp breeze. The community center field was packed with people: veterans, families, curious townsfolk, and even a local news crew. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Daniel stood near the staging area, his palms sweating despite the cool air. Max sat calmly by his side, his leash loose, his gaze scanning the crowd. His training was holding steady, but Daniel could sense the nervous energy beneath the surface. When their turn came, Daniel took a deep breath and stepped onto the field, Max walking confidently at his side. The instructor explained that Daniel and Max would perform a trust exercise, one that simulated a real-life situation requiring absolute focus and obedience. A series of obstacles had been set up: loudspeakers emitting sudden bursts of noise, fluttering flags, and even volunteers pretending to be distressed bystanders. It was a recreation of chaos, designed to test not just the dog's training, but the handler's trust in his companion. As the whistle blew, Daniel commanded, "Max, stay close." They began the course, Max staying perfectly by Daniel's left side, his movements sharp and responsive. But halfway through, a loud siren blared, startling several of the dogs nearby. Max froze for just a second, his body tense, his ears flat. Daniel crouched beside him, his voice low and calm. "It's okay, Max. Focus on me. Just me." Max looked up at Daniel, and something incredible happened. His body relaxed, his tail lifted slightly, and he pressed his side against Daniel's leg before continuing forward. They finished the course without another hesitation. As they crossed the final marker, the crowd erupted in applause. Daniel stood tall, pride swelling in his chest. He crouched down to Max's level, taking his face in his hands. "You did it, boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." Max licked his cheek, his eyes bright and full of trust. In that moment, Daniel realized this wasn't just a victory for Max. It was a victory for himself. A sign that despite the weight of the past, he was learning to live again, to trust, to hope. Later, as the event wound down, Karen found Daniel sitting quietly under the old oak tree, Max lying at his side, both of them watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and crimson. "You two were incredible today," Karen said softly. Daniel nodded. "It wasn't about being perfect," he replied. "It was about showing up." "And we did," Karen smiled. "That's all healing really is, Daniel. Showing up over and over again until it finally starts to feel like living." As the sky darkened and the stars appeared one by one, Daniel leaned back against the tree, his hand resting gently on Max's head. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home. As spring arrived, the town seemed to awaken with it. The heavy gray clouds that had lingered through winter were replaced by crisp blue skies and soft breezes that carried the scent of blooming wildflowers. And with each passing day, Daniel felt a renewed sense of peace growing inside him. The quiet walks with Max became longer, and Daniel found himself smiling more, speaking with neighbors he once avoided. But it wasn't just him. Max had changed too. His confidence had blossomed. The once nervous pup now held his head high, his steps full of purpose. One afternoon, During their usual walk through the park, Daniel noticed a small group of children gathered near the community center. They were huddled close together, whispering and glancing nervously toward a boy sitting alone on the bench. He looked to be around 10 years old, his head down, shoulders slumped. Max pulled at the leash gently, his eyes fixed on the boy. Daniel knelt next to Max and whispered, "What do you think, buddy? Should we go say hello?" Max gave a quiet bark and wagged his tail, leading Daniel toward the boy. As they approached, Daniel offered a warm smile. "Hey there, mind if we join you?" The boy looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but curious. When he saw Max, his expression softened, and he reached out hesitantly. "This is Max," Daniel introduced. "He's a pretty good listener if you ever need one." The boy's hand trembled slightly as he ran his fingers through Max's thick fur. "He's really calm," the boy whispered. "He wasn't always," Daniel admitted. "But we worked through a lot of tough stuff together." The boy nodded, his lips pressed tight. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "My dad was a soldier too, but he's not coming home." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He sat down on the bench beside the boy, Max lying quietly at their feet. "I'm sorry," Daniel said softly. "That's a really hard thing to carry. I lost someone close to me too. And for a long time, I didn't think I'd be okay again. But then I met Max, and he showed me how to keep going, even when it feels impossible." The boy glanced down at Max, who seemed to understand every word. Slowly, the boy leaned down, wrapped his small arms around Max, and buried his face in the dog's fur. Daniel sat quietly, letting the moment happen. That encounter stayed with him long after the boy had walked away. It reminded him of why he and Max had made it through their darkest days, because there was always someone out there who needed to know they weren't alone. That night, Daniel sat by the fireplace, Max resting his head in his lap. His mind raced with an idea that felt bigger than anything he'd ever considered. "What do you think, Max?" he whispered. "What if we took this further? Helped more people like that boy, like me, like you?" Max looked up at him with those wise, knowing eyes, and Daniel knew his answer. The next day, Daniel reached out to Karen and proposed the idea that had kept him awake all night, starting a mentorship and healing program for veterans and their families, centered around the bond between people and rescue dogs like Max. Karen's face lit up. "Daniel, that's exactly what this town, and people like us, need." And so, the groundwork for Paws of Valor was laid. With help from the community, Daniel secured a plot of land near the edge of town. Over the following weeks, volunteers helped build training areas, quiet spaces for reflection, and comfortable shelters for the rescue dogs that would soon arrive. Word spread quickly, and before long, veterans and their families began attending workshops, finding peace in the steady presence of their loyal companions. Through it all, Max stood proudly at Daniel's side, a living testament to the healing power of loyalty, love, and perseverance. One afternoon, as Daniel stood by the entrance of Paws of Valor, he watched a new group of veterans arrive, each one accompanied by a hopeful dog by their side. He took a deep breath, feeling the sun warm his face. "We did it, Max," he whispered. And for the first time in his life, Daniel didn't just feel like a survivor. He felt like he was truly living. A year had passed since Paws of Valor opened its gates, and the once empty land had transformed into a sanctuary of hope. Where there had been silence, now there were sounds of life. Dogs barking playfully, laughter of children, and the warm conversations of people slowly stitching their lives back together. Daniel stood near the memorial garden he had built at the heart of the sanctuary. It was a peaceful place, filled with blooming wildflowers and a stone path that led to a modest monument engraved with a simple message, in honor of the silent battles fought and won. Max sat quietly beside him, his muzzle now tinged with streaks of gray. Time had moved forward, and though the dog's steps had slowed, his spirit remained as strong and loyal as ever. Looking around the grounds, Daniel felt a quiet pride settle over him. Families gathered beneath the old oak trees, veterans worked gently with their canine partners, and children played in the open fields. This place had become more than a refuge. It was living proof that broken hearts and fractured lives could be mended. As the afternoon sun bathed the sanctuary in golden light, Daniel was approached by a familiar face, young Tommy, the boy he had met on that bench in the park so long ago. But Tommy wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a young German shepherd named Scout, his tail wagging proudly, his eyes bright with excitement. "Hey, Sergeant Brooks," Tommy called out, his face glowing with happiness. "Scout passed all his training. He's officially my therapy dog now." Daniel crouched down and extended his hand to the dog. "Scout, huh? That's a fine name," he said, smiling as the eager pup licked his hand. Tommy beamed. "He helped me with my nightmares, just like Max helped you." Daniel swallowed the lump rising in his throat and placed a firm hand on Tommy's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, kid, both of you." Karen soon joined them, holding a clipboard and wearing that familiar look of quiet satisfaction. "We have a full roster next month," she told Daniel, "and a waiting list after that." Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the sanctuary. "Looks like we're just getting started," he said quietly. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sanctuary settled into a calm hush, Daniel sat by the fire pit with Max lying next to him. The stars emerged one by one, twinkling like silent witnesses to the journey that had brought them here. Daniel reached down, his fingers gently brushing through Max's soft fur. "You changed my life, old friend," he whispered. "And now, look at everything we've built because of you." Max lifted his head, his eyes still filled with that unwavering trust, and let out a low, contented sigh before resting his head back on Daniel's lap. For a while, Daniel sat there in the quiet, thinking of the path that had led him to this very moment. The battles, the storms, the silent nights filled with grief, and the healing that had come in the most unexpected way, from a small, frightened canine puppy who had given him something no medal, no mission, and no amount of money ever could: unconditional love. The fire crackled softly, and Daniel tilted his head back to look at the stars. "If this story touched your heart," he said quietly, as if speaking directly to the unseen faces beyond the horizon, "remember, no matter how dark life gets, there's always a way back to the light. You just have to take the first step, and sometimes you'll find the right companion to help guide you through." A cool breeze drifted across the field, rustling the leaves of the old oaks, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt completely at peace. And as the final embers of the fire faded, Daniel smiled, knowing that the legacy of loyalty, love, and hope would live on through Paws of Valor, through Max, through every life they touched. And that was a legacy worth everything. Months later, under the warm glow of a summer sunset, Daniel stood before a small crowd gathered at Paws of Valor. At his side, Max sat quietly, his muzzle now silvered with age, his eyes still filled with unwavering loyalty. Daniel took a deep breath and looked out at the faces before him. "Max taught me that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about finding the strength to live despite it," he said. "Today, we honor that strength." With a simple gesture, Daniel revealed a bronze statue near the entrance of the sanctuary. The sculpture captured Max standing tall, forever watching over the place they had built together. On the base, the inscription read, "Max, the guardian of second chances." That night, beneath their favorite oak tree, Daniel sat with Max resting his head on his lap. The stars glowed above, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. "You did well, my friend," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "You saved me." Max's breathing slowed, his tired body finally at peace. And as Daniel held him close, he knew that while their time together was ending, Max's legacy would live on forever, etched not just in stone, but in every life they had touched. For love like theirs never truly says goodbye.